What happens when Hollywood's most unpredictable star sits down with television's most relentless interrogator? The answer involves raised voices, uncomfortable silences, and one of the most explosive morning television moments ever captured on live broadcast. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities who refuse to back down from tough interviews. The Good Morning America studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as Mark Wahlberg settled into the familiar interview chair across from George Stephanopoulos. What should have been a routine promotional appearance for Wahlberg's latest action thriller was about to become anything but routine. Tension was palpable from the moment the camera started rolling, and it only escalated from there. "Mark, welcome back to Good Morning America," Stephanopoulos began, his tone already carrying an edge that regular viewers might have recognized as his interview attack mode. "I have to say, watching your latest film, I couldn't help but notice the irony of you playing a reformed character when your own past continues to generate controversy." Wahlberg's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but those who knew him well could see the warning sign. His jaw tightened slightly, and his hands clasped together in his lap. "George, I thought we were here to talk about the movie, not relitigate things from decades ago." "But isn't that exactly the problem?" Stephanopoulos pressed, leaning forward with the persistence of a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. "You've built this entire brand around redemption and second chances. Yet you've never truly addressed the elephant in the room. Don't you think the public deserves more than just carefully crafted public relations responses?" The host's strategy was becoming clear. This wasn't going to be a softball promotional interview. Stephanopoulos had done his homework, and he was determined to push Wahlberg into territory the actor clearly preferred to avoid. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Listen, George," Wahlberg replied, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as his frustration grew. "I've talked about my past plenty of times. I've taken responsibility. I've made amends. And I've spent the last 30 years trying to be a better person. What more do you want from me?" "What I want is honesty," Stephanopoulos shot back without missing a beat. "What I want is for you to stop hiding behind this manufactured image of the reformed bad boy. Your victims deserve more than just generic apologies delivered through publicists and carefully worded statements." The color drained slightly from Wahlberg's face, but his voice remained steady, though noticeably harder. "Manufactured image, George? Everything I've done to change my life has been real. The work I've done in my community, the programs I've supported, the way I've raised my kids, that's not manufactured. That's my life. But you've also fought against having your juvenile records unsealed," Stephanopoulos continued relentlessly. "You've used your wealth and influence to keep certain details buried. How is that taking full responsibility?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Wahlberg's publicist, sitting just off camera, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This was not going according to plan. The interview was supposed to focus on the film, touch briefly on Wahlberg's family life, and wrap up with some light-hearted banter about his upcoming projects. Instead, it had become a confrontational examination of the actor's most sensitive subject. "You know what, George?" Wahlberg said, his voice rising slightly. "I came here in good faith to talk about a movie that employs hundreds of people, that entertains audiences, that tells a story worth telling. Instead, you want to play gotcha journalism with events from when I was a teenager." "Gotcha journalism?" Stephanopoulos' eyebrows shot up in apparent disbelief. "Mark, these aren't tabloid rumors or gossip. These are documented incidents that affected real people's lives. Shouldn't those people matter more than your comfort level?" The exchange was becoming increasingly heated, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Camera operators exchanged glances, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away. The show's producers, watching from the control room, were frantically trying to decide whether to intervene or let the drama play out. Of course those people matter, Wahlberg replied, his composure beginning to crack. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism, George. It's ambush television. You brought me here under false pretenses, and now you're trying to embarrass me on national television. I brought you here to have an honest conversation, Stephanopoulos responded coolly, clearly enjoying the fact that he had gotten under Wahlberg's skin. If you find honesty embarrassing, that says more about you than it does about my questions. The insult was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Wahlberg's hands unclenched and then clenched again, a clear sign that his famous temper was beginning to flare. The Mark Wahlberg who had grown up on the streets of Dorchester was starting to emerge from beneath the polished Hollywood exterior. "You want honesty, George?" Wahlberg asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Here's some honesty for you. You're sitting there acting like some moral authority, but we both know this isn't about justice or accountability. This is about ratings. This is about you trying to create a viral moment at my expense." Stephanopoulos' smile was razor-thin and completely devoid of warmth. "Mark, I'm just doing my job. If you can't handle basic questions about your public record, maybe you shouldn't be doing promotional interviews?" The condescension in the host's voice was unmistakable, and it was exactly the wrong tone to take with someone like Wahlberg. The actor's entire body language shifted, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually get up and walk out of the interview right then and there. "Basic questions," Wahlberg repeated, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge that anyone familiar with his early films would recognize. "George, there's nothing basic about what you're doing here. You're trying to destroy someone's reputation on live television, and you're calling it journalism." Stephanopoulos leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "Mark, your reputation isn't my responsibility. That's something you created through your own actions. I'm simply asking you to address those actions honestly, without the usual Hollywood spin." Hollywood spin. Wahlberg's laugh was harsh and completely humorless. "You want to talk about spin? Let's talk about how you've twisted this entire interview. You told my people this was going to be about the movie, about my production company, about the positive work I'm doing. Instead, you've turned it into a hit piece." "I told your people I was going to ask real questions," Stephanopoulos replied smoothly. "If you expected softball questions about your latest vanity project, you came to the wrong show. This is Good Morning America, not Entertainment Tonight." The dismissive way he said "vanity project" was clearly intended to provoke, and it worked. Wahlberg's face flushed red, and for a moment the veneer of Hollywood professionalism completely disappeared. "Vanity project? Do you have any idea how many people worked on this film? How many families depend on projects like this for their livelihoods?" "I'm sure they do," Stephanopoulos said with mock sympathy. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're using your platform to rehabilitate an image that maybe doesn't deserve rehabilitation. Some actions have permanent consequences, Mark. Some mistakes can't be fixed with charitable donations and good publicity." The words hit Wahlberg like a physical blow. He sat forward in his chair, his voice dropping to a level that somehow managed to be both quiet and menacing. "You know what, George? You're right about one thing. Some mistakes do have permanent consequences, and you're making one right now." Stephanopoulos' eyebrows rose in apparent amusement. "Is that a threat, Mark?" "It's not a threat," Wahlberg replied coldly. "It's a prediction. You think you're being clever here, but what you're really doing is showing everyone what kind of person you are. You're showing them that you care more about creating drama than actually informing your audience. What I care about," Stephanopoulos shot back, "is holding public figures accountable for their actions. You've made millions of dollars trading on this reformed bad boy image, but you've never truly faced the music for what you did. Don't you think it's time?" The host's persistence was relentless, and it was clear he had no intention of backing down or changing the subject. Every response seemed calculated to push Wahlberg further toward an explosion, and the strategy was working perfectly. Face the music? Wahlberg's voice was rising again, and this time he made no attempt to control it. "I've faced more music than you could ever imagine, George. I've lived with the consequences of my mistakes every single day for 30 years. But apparently, that's not enough for you. Apparently, you need me to crawl on my belly and beg for forgiveness on national television." "I don't need you to do anything," Stephanopoulos replied with infuriating calm. "But your victims might appreciate something more than the carefully worded apologies your lawyers have crafted over the years. They might appreciate some genuine remorse instead of this defensive anger you're showing right now." The word victims seemed to trigger something deep within Wahlberg. His entire demeanor shifted, and suddenly the successful Hollywood actor disappeared entirely, replaced by the street kid from Boston, who had learned to fight before he learned to act. "You want to see genuine remorse?" Wahlberg asked, his voice now shaking with barely controlled rage. "You want to see what real accountability looks like? It looks like a kid who made terrible mistakes and then spent the next 3 decades trying to make up for them. It looks like someone who built schools, who funded programs for at-risk youth, who used his success to try to prevent other kids from making the same mistakes. But it also looks like someone who sealed his juvenile records," Stephanopoulos interrupted smoothly. "Someone who used his wealth and influence to keep the full extent of his actions hidden from public view." "That doesn't sound like accountability to me, Mark. That sounds like damage control." The accusation hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Wahlberg stared at his interrogator for a long moment, and everyone in the studio could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Part of him wanted to explain, to justify, to make Stephanopoulos understand. But another part of him, the part that had survived the streets of Dorchester, was telling him that this man wasn't interested in understanding anything. "You know what your problem is, George?" Wahlberg finally said, his voice now deadly quiet. "Your problem is that you think you're better than everyone else. You sit behind that desk with your perfect hair and your perfect diction, and you judge people who actually had to fight for everything they got." Stephanopoulos' smile was patronizing in the extreme. "Mark, this isn't about me. This is about you and your refusal to take full responsibility for actions that hurt innocent people. If you can't see the difference, that's part of the problem." "No, George," Wahlberg replied, leaning forward until he was almost nose-to-nose with the host. "The problem is that you've already made up your mind about who I am and what I deserve. You don't want accountability. You want a public execution, and you want to be the one holding the axe." The metaphor was violent and uncomfortable, and it seemed to energize Stephanopoulos rather than intimidate him. "That's quite an image, Mark. Very telling, actually. Do you often think in terms of violence when you're challenged?" The question was a masterstroke of manipulation designed to make Wahlberg look unstable regardless of how he answered. If he denied it, he would seem defensive. If he acknowledged it, he would seem dangerous. It was exactly the kind of trap that had made Stephanopoulos one of the most feared interviewers on television. Wahlberg stared at Stephanopoulos for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the studio becoming almost unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled but filled with a cold fury that was somehow more intimidating than any shouting could have been. "You know what, George? You're absolutely right. I do think in terms of violence when I'm dealing with people who attack me for sport. That's what happens when you grow up the way I did. But here's the difference between you and me. I learned to channel that instinct into something productive. You just learned to hide your violence behind a suit and a smile." Stephanopoulos' confident expression flickered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. "That's an interesting deflection, Mark, but we're not here to discuss my background. We're here to discuss yours, and specifically your pattern of avoiding real accountability." "Avoiding accountability?" Wahlberg's control finally snapped completely. "You want accountability? Fine. Let's talk about accountability. Let's talk about how you've spent this entire interview trying to humiliate a guest who came here in good faith. Let's talk about how you've twisted every answer I've given to fit your predetermined narrative. Stephanopoulos said, with the kind of condescending tone usually reserved for unruly children. Getting angry isn't going to change the facts of your past. Don't you dare tell me to calm down, Wahlberg shot back, his voice now loud enough that everyone in the studio could hear it clearly. And don't you dare lecture me about facts when you've spent 20 minutes distorting everything I've said. The host's smile was now openly smug. Mark, I haven't distorted anything. I've simply asked you direct questions about documented events. If you find those questions uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why that is. You know what I find uncomfortable, George? Wahlberg was fully standing now, his hands planted firmly on the small table between them. I find it uncomfortable that someone who claims to be a journalist thinks it's acceptable to ambush guests with gotcha questions designed to create viral moments instead of actually informing the public. Stephanopoulos remained seated, clearly enjoying the fact that he had pushed Wahlberg to this point. Mark, please sit down. You're making our viewers uncomfortable. I'm making them uncomfortable? Wahlberg laughed bitterly. George, I think they're uncomfortable because they're watching you try to destroy someone's reputation for entertainment value. They're uncomfortable because they can see what kind of person you really are. What I really am, Stephanopoulos replied coolly, is someone who asks the questions that need to be asked. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye. The dismissive arrogance in his voice was the final straw. Wahlberg straightened to his full height, and for a moment, everyone in the studio thought he might actually reach across the table. Instead, he took a step back and shook his head in disgust. You know what, George? You win. You got exactly what you wanted. You pushed and prodded and manipulated until you got me to lose my temper on national television. Congratulations! I hope it was worth it. Mark, nobody forced you to react this way, Stephanopoulos said, his tone now dripping with false sympathy. Your reaction to legitimate questions says more about your character than my questions ever could. Legitimate questions? Wahlberg's voice was incredulous. George, nothing about this interview has been legitimate. You've been playing games from the moment I sat down, and we both know it. Stephanopoulos turned slightly toward the camera as if he was about to address the audience directly, but Wahlberg wasn't finished. Don't you dare turn to that camera, Wahlberg said sharply. Don't you dare try to play the victim here. You orchestrated this entire confrontation, and now you want to act like I'm the unreasonable one. Mark, I think it's time for you to leave, Stephanopoulos said quietly, but loud enough for the microphones to pick up clearly. Oh, I'm leaving, Wahlberg replied, already reaching for the small microphone clipped to his shirt. But not because you're kicking me off. I'm leaving because I have too much respect for myself to sit here and let you continue this charade. As he fumbled with the microphone clip, his hands shaking slightly with adrenaline, Wahlberg continued talking. You want to know what real accountability looks like, George? It looks like admitting when you've made a mistake. It looks like owning up to your failures instead of trying to deflect blame onto others. Mark, please, Stephanopoulos said. But there was no real authority in his voice now. The interview had spiraled completely out of his control. Please, what? Wahlberg demanded, finally freeing himself from the microphone. Please sit here quietly while you try to humiliate me. Please pretend that this ambush interview is legitimate journalism. I don't think so. He took a step toward the edge of the interview area, then turned back to face Stephanopoulos one final time. You know what the real tragedy is here, George? You had a chance to have a real conversation about redemption, about change, about how people can grow and learn from their mistakes. Instead, you chose to turn it into a circus. Stephanopoulos opened his mouth to respond, but Wahlberg cut him off with a sharp gesture. I'm done talking to you, he said firmly. But I'll tell you this much. When people watch this interview, they're not going to see a journalist holding a celebrity accountable. They're going to see exactly what kind of person you are, and they're going to make their own judgments about who deserves their respect. With that, Mark Wahlberg turned and walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving George Stephanopoulos sitting alone at the interview desk, his carefully constructed ambush having backfired in the most spectacular way possible. The studio fell into stunned silence as cameras continued rolling, capturing every awkward second of the aftermath. The confrontation between Hollywood's most unpredictable star and television's most ruthless interrogator had reached its explosive conclusion, leaving viewers to decide for themselves who had crossed the line and who had simply refused to be pushed around. What do you think? Was Stephanopoulos justified in his aggressive questioning, or did he go too far in his pursuit of a viral moment? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible celebrity confrontations like this one.